Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. We have Combat Patrol for Warhammer 40k, and we now have Spearhead for Age of Sigmar. But what do we have for Warhammer the Old World?
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems and offer custom items to suit your club, your event or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Now, this is a subject I've seen risen in many of the Facebook groups online and also from other YouTubers on their channels as well. And there's been a few really nice videos about how to get started playing smaller points games, which we're all able to do with our main rulebook. We can just reduce the points level, etc. Make up some guidelines about how we maybe reduce certain restrictions. And away you go. And I'm not trying to build something new from that, but a few days ago, Games Workshop put out an article on Warhammer Community with some new scenarios for Warhammer the Old World. And I think in there could be a perfect use for that for small games, but maybe a clue to something that could come in the future. It was a couple of weeks ago now that this article first went out, and it's no doubt been commented on many times before, and these things have been shared and discussed in the groups I was mentioning earlier on. And 3 new scenarios were released as part of the Warhammer World anniversary, which was at the weekend of the 1st and 2nd of March 2025, depending on when you're watching this video. There were 3 scenarios released as part of this pack that were linked to the ongoing sort of lore that's happening across the arcane journals as they're being released at the moment. And if you've been picking those up and reading the lore, the stories within these scenarios will be familiar to you. The characters will be familiar to you. We have 3. We have the Seize the Tower upon shrouded shores and toppling of the Waystones. But it's the first one, the small one, the Seize the Tower, which is what I want to discuss in this video. And it's not even the scenario itself I want to discuss in this video. All 3 are great fun, and I haven't tried them yet. I'm sure some of you have. I'm sure many of you haven't as well. I think it's great they've put out there. But it's the game size of the first one, which is 500 points, and the restrictions that have been applied to that scenario that I think are really, really interesting. Many of you will remember Warhammer Border Patrol. The rules were published in White Dwarf 285, also in the 2004 Warhammer Chronicles, and they basically set out a number of rules and ideas and restrictions to play small games of Warhammer Fantasy, as it was then, at 500 points. They were restrictions similar in many ways to those in that scenario, which we're going to discuss in a short moment. You could only have a single hero to lead your force, and they could not be a battle standard bearer. You had to have 2 units, I believe, but no more than a maximum of 4. You must have 1 core choice at least as well. Lots of little things based around keeping it fair, making sure you had inventory on the table, which was really important as well. So you had these really nice, cool, varied, shrunken down forces for fun games of Warhammer, which were short in terms of game length, maybe great for new players to learn to play the game as well, which is just good fun all round. The original article even included these fun example lists and these scenarios as well that were designed to work perfectly for these smaller games, and I just think they're really, really great. And talking to people who were playing fantasy at the time, they were very popular, got people excited, even players that are playing at much larger levels, playing bigger games, maybe even events and things. This was just great for club night. The idea to try out an army that you hadn't already tried before, do that little small project, scratch that itch for an army that you didn't think you want to build a whole big 2,000 point one for. And I think that, again, that's really great and positive as well. I think, in essence, that first 500 point scenario, the Siege of the Tower, has some restrictions or guidelines for building your force to play the game, which echo some of those other things that we've seen before in Border Patrol. Yes, maybe toned down a little bit, designed just for that one scenario, but I think it gives a really nice basis that you could take the army building restrictions in that scenario and apply them to the old world and play some 500 point games. So let's have a little look at what those restrictions are, ignoring all the stuff about High Elves and Warriors of Chaos, because that's designed for the narrative built into the scenario. What we're doing is stripping out the core idea for it and looking at how that can be turned into a format for 500 point games. So a minimum of 2 units. Each player's army must include a minimum of 2 non-character units rather than the usual 3. So that's just a simple restriction, cutting it down based on the lack of points you have, but also keeping that minimum in there so that you are having units and not just filling it up with characters. And the next restriction also does the same thing in many ways. So the character limitations. When writing muster lists, neither player must spend more than 125 points, 25% of their army's total points value on a single character. So you could have more than one. So the restriction is slightly different to the old-fashioned Border Patrol there. And again, I think the idea of having maybe a level 1 wizard and a low-level hero maybe isn't all too bad either at 500 points. When we get on to unit limitations, we have 175 points, or 35% of the army's total points value on a single core unit. So you can't spend more than that on a single unit, which again restricts you from building this really horrible, big, unkillable block in the centre. 150 points, or 30% of the army's total points value on a single special unit, and then 125 points, or 25% of the army's total value on a single rare or mercenary unit. And I like the idea that you can still have mercenaries in there as well, which is really cool. It doesn't cut that out. Items are usually restricted as 1 per 1,000 points. You can still have, but only 1 in the whole army. So if you've got 3 or 4 items listed in your army list that are normally restricted to 1 per 1,000 points, you could choose 1 single of those restricted items and have them in your 500 point army list. So the restrictions are a little bit different to Border Patrol, but they've got that same feel to them, and they feel like they're trying to do a similar thing to keep a bit of balance and have a force that isn't just 1 unit or 1 powerful character, and you've got a nice little mix of smaller units on the table, so you can have a fun little game of Warhammer, which I think Border Patrol back in 6th edition, which I think was the time that was written for, and the Old World now are looking to do the same kind of thing and produce the same kind of fun games. The setup section was the next part that surprised me a little bit, and in a good way. I quite like this. It's the game table size that's recommended as well. It being that side of the business, the SDS side of the business, I would just assume they would have gone use a 4x4 rather than using a full 6x4 or even go 3x3. And you see that with Middle Earth a little bit as well. They don't tend to use the new Games Workshop sizes, but this does. This recommends the 30x44 inch game table size, which is the Combat Patrol table size. If you play 40k and you've picked up a starter set, that's the board size that you get in it. It's 2 times your kill team size, 2 times your Warcry size. So if you have any of those boards as well, you could double them up and use them for this. But if you have Combat Patrol and a board for it, you might be able to use it. It might look a bit too 40k. I know the new AOS boards are probably like that as well, but again, I think they got the objectives printed all over them these days. But it's cool. It makes me start looking through my collection of neoprene mats, and some of them are a bit messed up, and maybe I'll just cut one down and I can use it on the kitchen table downstairs. It's definitely got me thinking about how fun it will be to have a little small setup, but I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more at the end. And the rest of the deployment and the first turn and game length is 5 rounds here, but most of it's fairly straightforward. 5 rounds seems like a long enough amount of time, and all the rest is very familiar to the rest of the game. Victory there, we have victory points as usual. You could apply different scenarios to this as well, which I really like the idea of scenarios alongside the usual victory points as well for changing up the meta for Warhammer the Old World, but that is a different video and a different subject and one I've touched on before. But we've got the usual, the King is Dead, Trophies of War and Siege the Tower in there, and it's got all the victory points values that you can score. So very, very familiar from the main rulebook. And that's it really. There's not an awful lot going on there for the scenario itself, but the guidelines for that scenario, or the rules for that scenario, can be completely lifted out and applied to any 500-point game of Warhammer the Old World. Should that matter? We can make these restrictions and things anyway. No, not at all. And I've seen people converting the old Border Patrol rules. And if you check out Tabletop Saga YouTube channel months and months ago, they were using those rules to play small games of Warhammer the Old World and really pushing it. But it's hard to get traction and community behind those things. Unless it's official sometimes. And I wonder here, we're having those restrictions in that scenario, we'll get some more people excited about playing some smaller games because the rules are written by Games Workshop. But in addition to that, I wonder whether that's something we might actually see in the future. There's all these rumours around what this match play guide, if it arrives, is going to be. And a lot of the assumption is all going to be based around 2000 point games. Maybe there'll be some surprises in that booklet. I'm guessing it's going to be a small booklet. Maybe there'll be some surprises in there, and maybe one of them will be a 500-point format for playing smaller events, small casual events, because not all events need to be super competitive as well. And again, if it's anything like the Middle-earth strategy battle game version, there were a few different tournament formats that were suggested in there, and it just gives you ideas of which you can build your match to play games on. And all it really means is two players playing an equal level in terms of what they can choose. And I think this would be really fun if it was in there. Not saying it is, I don't know whether it is or not, but it wouldn't surprise me seeing this in this format on this scenario if we were surprised with this. Maybe it's not in the book, maybe it's something they produce later on and put out in a White Dwarf article, maybe it's something that just goes up a Warcom as well. But I would love to see Warhammer the Old World Border Patrol with those restrictions and maybe a few other little tips and things chucked in there as well to expand it out. But I think it's usable as it is, and I plan to very much. For me, that will become a way of playing more games with my son, who's played a couple of games of Warhammer the Old World, but it's a lot for him. He's only 10 years old, can play war games, but needs a lot of help. So with a game as complex as Warhammer the Old World, and it's complex for me as much as it is for him, it means I'm kind of playing myself, whereas at 500 points, when you've got 2 or 3, maybe 4 units, small units, it's a lot easier to choose your own army really and get an idea. There's less magic weapons and choices and things going on there. So you can choose his own army, learn how to list build in that small scale, learn the rules in small scale, and really slowly build from it, maybe up to those larger games. And they take less time as well, because a long game of Warhammer the Old World with a child is probably too much for their attention span. If it's taking adults 2 to 3 hours to play a 2,000-point game, it takes a lot longer when you're playing it with someone younger or someone new. So again, this is a really little fun format that you can use for those learning games as well, or just an excuse, as I mentioned at the top of the video, to try out something new. We've got Beasts of Chaos on the way next, we think. They've not been announced yet at the time I'm recording this. And I don't really have any plans to do a full beast in an army, but I'm going to be doing some painting tutorials for the channel, or maybe all the models I paint can go towards a nice little 500-point fun force that my sons can use in some fun kitchen table games with me, because a 30 by 44 mat will fit on my kitchen table rather than being up here 2 floors up in my office, which we can't always do on a Saturday afternoon. So again, more possibilities. Really let me know what you think in the comments below. I know it's a free scenario, it's not a Border Patrol for the Old World, but I feel the possibilities are there. The very fact that they chose that table size makes me wonder whether they are planning something for the future. Could be nothing. But let me know in the comments what you think. But thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, please do check out all the links in the video description, including my Patreon, which really is the best way to support me, to give me the time to keep making these videos. Give the video a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There's going to be lots more Old World moving on into the future. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.